Hello, I'm Jenna Dagenhart with Ascent TV. Here in the heart of New York City, we bring you a global exclusive with Anthony Scaramucci, famously known as the Mooch. He's former White House communications director, as well as founder and co-managing partner of Skybridge Capital. We speak to him about everything from the 2020 election to monetary policy in a candid conversation at his restaurant, the Hunt and Fish Club, right around the corner. Started with the economy as well as the 2020 election. There's also SALT that I want to address as well.
Okay,
but starting with 2020, what did you make of the second Democratic Party presidential debate?
I mean, it's like ridiculous. It's like literally like a clown car showed up and they rolled into the circus and 20 people jumped out of it and they're yelling and screaming at each other. And so they are playing right into the president's hands, because if you looked at the level of donations to the Democrats, it's actually quite competitive to an incumbent president, but it's scattered over 20 candidates. The messaging is very, very uneven. It's very disjointed. And so I thought last night's debate was a disaster. And now I'm not saying this because you think I'm in the tank for the president. It's just that, like, you can't have a 10-person free-for-all because it doesn't work, you know? And it didn't work for the Republicans back in 2016.
One of those 20 candidates is going to face off the Republican ticket in 2020. Who do you think has the best chance against the president or whoever that person may be?
So listen, I've run a reasonable amount of money. We've got over $10 billion under management, and I'm placing bets all day. This is not something I would place a bet on right now because there's like 15, 16 months to go. Lots of uncertainty, a lot of moving pieces. I know this sounds crazy, but there could be even a new entrant into the space that we're not aware of.
You?
Me, what would I run as? I'm a Republican. Trust me, no one's running against the president. Okay, but on the topic of politics, there are 20 people. Joe Biden is the most likely person to have the best competitive challenge to the president. But it's unclear to me that he gets the nomination because Democrats like voting for younger people, and they've done better with younger people. Barack Obama below the age of 50, Bill Clinton below the age of 50. John Kennedy below the age of 50. Republicans do better above the age of 60. Ronald Reagan, Donald Trump, George Herbert Walker Bush. So to me, my bet is they go with somebody younger than Joe Biden, but I think he would be the one that would be the most competitively matched against the president. But the president would still beat him because Vice President Biden just doesn't have the verbal dexterity that he's going to need for a fight like this.
And you've supported Obama, you've supported people from both parties. If you were offered a position in the new administration, would you take it?
It depends on the position. If it was a nonpartisan position, I mean, listen, there were Douglas Dillon was the lone Republican in the Kennedy cabinet. Robert Gates was a Republican that stayed on as defense secretary. If it was a nonpartisan position where I could be focused on right or wrong policies as opposed to left or right policies, yeah, I'm open to serving. I've had an amazing life in the United States. And so if I'm called to serve the American government, I would do it. Now, last time I got called to serve, it was a short stay. It was like an extended stay at a Holiday Inn. I was only there for 11 days. And so, but I mean, could it happen again? Who knows? And the answer is yes, serve.
To steal a phrase from your book,
go ahead.
You said that you used the phrase political purgatory. Do you still feel like you're stuck in that political purgatory at all?
No, absolutely not. When I wrote the book, it was last summer. It came out early October, and I felt that there was some hazing and some political purgatory that had happened to me. But I mean, I guess more through persistence and levels of resilience and, just some degree of defiance, a little bit of that William Wallace Braveheart stuff. I just am going to be who I am, and if you invite me to be interviewed, then I'm going to come on and be interviewed. And I'm also going to speak my mind honestly about what I see, because I notice that people in Washington are allergic to the truth. So I find if I'm upsetting everybody that I'm probably onto something. We're probably going in the right direction.
And yes, you're very candid. I noticed recently on Twitter that you wrote that you were actually very proud that you were disinvited from the GOP fundraiser in Palm Beach. Why is that?
Those
Why are you
guys
proud
are
of
a bunch of babies. They're like, they used me as a political prop. So they invited me down there because they thought I was going to help them raise money. And then all of a sudden they've got this like litmus test where you have to have 100% purity around all the president's tweets. But the irony of the whole thing is that the president walked back his the whole send him back chant that was going on. And North Carolina, the president said, geez, I didn't really like that. We got to walk that stuff back. So what are they going to do? Disinvite the president from the Lobster Fest? I mean, these guys are a bunch of political hacks and jokers, and it's the thing that people despise about politicians in general. So I thought that was like a badge of honor that they disinvited me. And, you know, by the way, it's better for my cholesterol. There'll be no lobster for me on that day, right?
Pivoting to the Fed, we just got our first Fed cut in more than a decade. Do you think that was the right move?
Oh, I absolutely think it was the right move, but I think the speech afterwards was not the right move because...
Stock market didn't like it.
Well, it's not that the stock market likes it. I'm actually, you know, in a more of a fixed income hedge fund, so I'm not going to talk up the market. But I know why the market didn't like it, because the market's looking at the same thing I'm looking at. I've been looking at the economy for 31 years, manage about $10 billion, and you have something going on where the Fed inflation target's 2%. You've got great productivity numbers. You created 2.7 million jobs last year. You had arguably 3% growth. It's being revised, so I don't know the exact number, but let's just call it 2 3/4 to 3% growth, and yet you only had 1.6% inflation. So the Fed got that last rate rise wrong, and so they're just going back to where they were prior to the December rate rise. And so one would argue that they probably have 1, possibly 2 more cuts to go. But I think what's happening is, you know, the president hit the Fed chair a couple of times on Twitter and said a couple of things around the helicopter about him. He probably didn't like it. He's got an ego. And so you saw the manifestation of his ego yesterday because the economy dictates, even though things are in general going well, if you look at rates around the world and you look at where the inflation deflation numbers
negative
are.
rates in certain places. Yeah,
you've got you got almost 50-ish% of the sovereign debt in a negative position. So that means you're actually paying people to lend them money. Okay, it's an anomaly, and it means that there's a specter of deflation out there. So let me just 30 seconds explain that. Deflation is actually really bad. My mother didn't go to college, but she's like, why is it bad? The prices of the chopped meat at the supermarket are going lower. Isn't that better for me? Well, it's better in that case, Ma, but it slows down consumption because people are worried. But then the big thing is debt destruction, because if I've got a $50,000 mortgage, a $50,000 salary, and a $250,000 mortgage, if prices are coming down, so are my wages. If my wages get cut in half, I can't afford to pay back the debt. And so in a debt-laden society, when you have deflation, you're running the risk of a massive debt destruction catastrophe. The last time that happened was in the 1929-1933 period. So if you're a central banker, you can live with and tolerate levels of inflation, but deflation is intolerable. And so he should have signaled that he was willing to move once, possibly twice, before the end of the year. And he has to do it before the end of the year because he can't be moving around during the election season. That's what happened to George Herbert Walker Bush with Alan Greenspan, and I don't think the Fed wants to be involved in the electoral politics right now.
Are you at all worried about the amount of ammunition that the Fed might or might not have if we were to encounter another recession?
I am, but what you also learn about the Fed and what Ben Bernanke proved, that you could create through quantitative easing a way to really drop interest rates. So you have zero interest rates at the front end, but then you start buying down the curve. Bernanke was reducing interest rates over the long end of the curve by 75 to 100 basis points. So if worse comes to worse, he's at 2 on the overnights. He was at 250, now he's at 2.25. If he moves to 2 before the end of the year, he has some ammunition, and then he can quantitatively ease. But it's important for your viewers to know, studying the economy over 120 years, you need about 400 basis points of economic monetary stimulus to smooth out the sharp edges of a recession. Now, having said that, that was before the Fed started doing quantitative easing. And so he's got room because of the quantitative easing. Last point, I think this is also a really important point to make for the wonks out there. It turns out that the Phillips curve, which is the relationship between inflation and unemployment, is way more elongated and flatter than we thought. And that is a direct result of all the technological innovation, the just-in-time inventories, the automation that has reduced the cost of manufactured goods and services. So the great irony here is the president's creating an economic miracle. We got wages up.
The labor market is extremely tight.
Extremely tight, yet the inflation numbers are not there. That means that people are working on rising wages and are being way more productive. So to me, the Fed has room to cut. I'm not saying that because I want the market to go up. Believe me, my business does better when the market doesn't go up because I'm in a defensive business, Skybridge.
You mentioned GDP, with GDP beating expectations in the second quarter, but still slowing to 2.1%. Do you think that that could have anything to do with China, or?
No question. I mean, the Fed said that. I mean, that was the one part of Jerome Powell's speech yesterday. I'm not a huge fan of the tariffs. The president doesn't like me talking about that, but the tariffs are ultimately a tax, and it's a regressive tax on individuals. So I'll give you the best example I can think of. My cousin Augie, I mean, every Italian has a cousin Augie, is in the auto glass business. And so he's installing auto glass, and he's buying the auto glass, unfortunately, from China because there's certain manufacturers that make certain windshield replacement that only comes now from China. And so he paid last month $10,000 in tariff taxes associated with those imports. Chinese did not pay them. He can't pass it on to his customers because it's a competitive pricing environment. And so his little business got hit with that $10,000 tariff. If the president goes to 25%, he's out of business. He won't be able to sustain that. Maybe larger competitors that have many stores could. And so what's happening is, on the margin, small businesses are slowing down a little bit. They're adjusting their investment capital. Larger businesses are saying, wow, the president's a little unpredictable. One minute he's putting tariffs on Mexico, one minute he's not. Now he's going to ratchet up tariffs again on September 1st. So he's slowing down the capital investment cycle. So it's sort of ironic. He cut rates, and he made the U.S. from a corporate tax perspective way more competitive, and it should induce more investment capital. But the uncertainty and the lack of predictability on the tariffs has actually slowed the stuff down. Look at the first and second quarter numbers, which is why the Fed, he was zinging the president a little bit. I'm cutting the rates, despite your tweets, because of the, in his mind, less strategic trade war. But I agree with the Fed chair on this. Tariffs are bad for the economy.
And along the same lines of tariffs, the president, in addition to pushing for lower interest rates, also has advocated for a weaker dollar. How does that play into the trade war with lower U.S. prices?
Well, no, the weaker dollar would obviously help. It would help to eliminate the imbalances. We don't have a time for a currency and trade lesson here, but just understand the Chinese hooked their currency to our currency because they knew we were going to be forced to monetize our debt. And just go back to 1971, you could buy 1 ounce of gold for $35. We took ourselves off the gold standard. Now 1 ounce of gold is $1,450. So we crushed our currency. We devalued it by 97.5%. Chinese knew that. They linked their currency to ours. So even though their factory production and exports were going up, and ergo their currency should have gone up, their currency went down with ours, and they got a subsidy by using a discounted currency to export their products. The Germans are doing the same thing with the euro. If we were in a Deutschmarkified world, the euro would trade at a 22 to 25% premium over the euro. And so the Germans have taken advantage of that. They're running at full employment, and they're the only Western economy with a budget surplus. So the president is really trying to right-size these asymmetric things. And so he made the decision recently not to weaken the dollar. I think that was a very, very good move because the economy's strong enough, and a stronger dollar will attract investors, foreign investors, into the U.S. And so I think that was a good move for him not to devalue. But the reason to devalue would be to sort of put those trade deficits back into balance. I don't agree with that right now. I don't think it's the right thing. I think we could beat the pants off these people by becoming more competitive and more innovative and have more capital spending, as opposed to the shenanigans that central banks and politicians do.
Before we move away from markets, are there any conviction calls that you would like to share with us?
I don't really have any conviction calls, but I do have a clarion call about market liquidity. I'm very, very concerned about the market's liquidity. I'm very concerned that the Volcker rule, which basically took tons of balance sheet capital out of the trading system. All commercial banks and investment banks regulated by the United States have dramatically reduced their balance sheet capital. And so what's happening is you're getting a lot more pockets of volatility. So I'll take you back to November 2018 to the end of the year, down 14.25, those 6 weeks. Then you go up 17. Then in the month of May, you're down 6.5, and then you rocketed up in June. Also in July, you did quite well. So So what's happening is you don't really have a lot of news. Fed may cut rates, may keep rates, Trump may tariff, may not tariff. There's no real exogenous shock to the system, yet you have all of this market volatility. So I would just caution people right now, the next crisis is not going to come from the banks. They're very stable. They have very good equity to debt capital ratios. The balance sheets are strong. But it could come from a liquidity-driven crisis like we had in 1987. So
Do
to
you
me,
think ETFs are exacerbating that in any way?
there's no question that they are. You know, and like the guys that own all these ETF companies are super mad at me, but you watched in August of 2015 where I think it was the technology ETF unbundled. So the basket of underlying stocks, the specific stocks, was moving differently than the top line ETF. Facebook dropped, I can't remember the numbers, but it was a high percentage drop in a few hours because of that disconnectivity. That implies that there's not a super amount of liquidity in the markets. Duke University did a study on this. Don't go by me, just look at what the Duke risk management people said in their statistics department about ETFs in a liquidity crisis. You may not be getting what you actually thought. So I would just caution people to be careful.
The SALT this year, Nouriel Roubini, famous economist, said that he thought that cryptocurrencies were the mother and father of all bubbles. What are your thoughts on cryptocurrency and Facebook's Libra?
Well, listen, you know, Nouriel is a very good friend of mine. I have been studying this since I left Washington. I sort of think that, you know, the horse already left the barn. You know, that's my opinion. I think these cryptocurrencies are here to stay. I think certain ones of them will grow. The technology itself that's creating anonymous, securitized transfer of currency is going to exist. It's going to continue to strengthen. I can't speak to Libra. You know, it sounds like the government and the Treasury, they don't really like Libra. And obviously the president orchestrated a tweet talking about the need for regulation and his dislike of digital currencies. But I'll tell you what, the fact that they're talking about it at that level, at Treasury and in the White House, is a sign that the horse has already left the barn. But, you know, he may be right that there'll be a boom-bust cycle, but I think if we're here 15 years from now, you're going to have digital currencies. I don't know which ones they'll be, but it feels like that's going to happen.
And finally, you have your upcoming SALT
Yes.
Thought Leadership Conference in Abu Dhabi.
So we teamed up with the Abu Dhabi Global Markets, ADGM. They built this beautiful island in the center of Abu Dhabi. Abu Dhabi is one of the cities of the future. It's a miraculous place. They've got a low tax environment, low regulation, very competitive capitalistic environment. We've spent many months with the government leaders there. We had members of their leadership team at our SALT conference in Las Vegas. We've done 10 conferences in the United States, all in Las Vegas. We did 2 in Singapore, 1 in Tokyo. Now that I'm back full-time at Skybridge, I wanted to pick a spot in the world where I knew our SALT delegates didn't know a lot about. And so we chose Abu Dhabi. And
First time you've done this in the Middle East?
First time we've done it in the Middle East. So I think what people will realize is that it's an absolutely beautiful country. It's a country of the future. And it's at a very interesting geographic position in the world where it is once again part of the trading flow of the world, both goods and services, equity markets and bond markets. And so I'm hoping that Skybridge will have a big future in Abu Dhabi.
Any speakers you're especially excited for?
So I can't really announce the speakers yet.
Well, between Will Smith, Joe Biden, Bill Clinton, you've had no
Richard
shortage
Branson,
of
George
major,
Bush. We've had 3 British prime ministers, 4 secretaries of state, 3 CIA directors. It's been a lot of fun. And Will Smith is a terrific guy, by the way. So is Ron Howard. So we've had a eclectic mix. Kobe Bryant, Magic Johnson. It's been a lot of fun for us. My biggest mistake was I had Boris Johnson on the hook for May, but unfortunately we couldn't get the logistics right. And
He's a little busy right now.
Yeah, but I waited a little bit too long. So by the time I was about to book him, he wasn't able to come. And if I had said yes, maybe 5 days earlier, I probably would have gotten him. He was the future prime minister, so my bad. You know, it's not the first mistake I've made in politics, by the way, in case you didn't know.